Alright, Shalom, first and foremost, all our praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Makah, Kodash. The honors to the elders, sing honors to the apostles, preaching and teaching us the word of truth. And with sincerity, as always. And in this lesson, I'm gonna just continue where I was on the book of Daniel. Book of Daniel here, verse. We're down on verse. In the last video, we discussed some of the gist of the book, this chapter of breakdown of Daniel 11. I was mainly going into Antiochus IV, and how these Christians how these fake Christians go off thinking that's going into the Antichrist. Their doctrine of what the Antichrist is. Some guy in a suit that's going to rule America and tell people to bow down to him, to take the mark of the beast. We went into verse 1. We discussed verse 1, how that's going into who is there is the Mede, which was Axares II, also known as the Historis in another chapter. We discussed who Xeres the Mede is in secular history, and certain artifacts and other accounts outside the scriptures that's going into who is Xeres the Mede. Basically, he has all kinds of names. Xeres the Mede, like Ugaru, Gab Arias, Ugbaru. It's like, if I'm not pronouncing those correctly, also known as Astyages. And we went into some context on Daniel 5. Going into Nabonidus, even though he's not mentioned in Daniel 5, but it has a lot to do with the context behind Daniel 5. And we went into some of the Nabonidus Chronicle. And just going into, once again, the downfall of Babylon, which is described in detail in Daniel 5. It was overnight. Overnight, it got taken down. So I want to go a bit into this. Now we're in this part here. Going into Darius the Mede's father, Cyaxares, and Nabopolassar, which is Nebuchadnezzar's father, or Nebuchadnezzar's II, but more specifically, the one that's mentioned in Daniel. Just to give you more background on Daniel, basically. Nebuchadnezzar, also known as Nebuchadnezzar II, or Nebuchadrezzar II. The name meaning, "O Nabu, protect my firstborn son," or "protect my hero." So that's what the name means. Nebuchadnezzar's name means that. Nabu, I guess, I imagine it was my guess is a Babylonian god. Because I never heard of that god. So yeah, that was a Babylonian god. Probably some god that Nebuchadnezzar worshipped. Or not probably, but yeah, it is. So it says there is the Medes' father, Cyaxares, who was from the Median Empire, allied with Nebuchadnezzar, or of the Neo-Babylonian kingdom. Yeah, so it's an interesting fact, man. Cyaxares, he's the second's father, or there is the Medes' father. He was known Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nebuchadnezzar. Because basically they had an alliance back then. Thus was the Medo-Babylonian alliance, because Babylon was the one that was gonna rouse up first. Spelled this wrong. Excuse my spelling here. It's not that I don't know how to spell. It's just sometimes just gotta type into the keyboard, and the keyboard is a bit too small. This is here. Was the Medo-Babylonian alliance? This is because Babylon was the one that was gonna rouse up first, but you had just as powerful empires like Medo Persia. They're in the background. Yeah, so Babylon basically, you know how it came up first, but you always had the Medo Persians there in the background who were also just as powerful. In their own right, in their own way. It just wasn't their time to shine. And so it says, but yeah, they basically were in peace just to destroy Assyria, who was that major superpower of that time that destroyed Northern Kingdom. If you know about that, Assyria destroyed Northern Kingdom. Assyria, I believe, goes back to the Iranians today. Because if I'm not mistaken, before they were called Iran, they were called Assyria. And I believe Babylon goes back to Elon, which goes back to Ishmael. And I want to say the Medes or Japheth, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that though, but and they're basically heathens though, which go back to Shem, not Israel. So it says the sack of Assur in 614. Cyaxares led the Median army into the Assyrian heartland and conquered the ancient city of Assur before Nabopolassar's forces could arrive. The two kings then formalized an alliance. 612, the fall of Nineveh. The combined Medo-Babylonian armies besieged razed the Assyrian capital, Nineveh. The decisive victory effectively shattered the Neo-Assyrian Empire. To strengthen their military pact, Nabopolassar's son, Nebuchadnezzar II, married Cyaxares' daughter, Amytis. Yeah, so that's just a fun fact right there. Darius the Mede's father would have been a brother-in-law to Nebuchadnezzar. So technically, yeah. It says, so the Medes were always there in alliance with Babylon. The Medes were Japheth, and the Persians were Elam. Yeah, I believe Babylon was Elam as well, if I'm not mistaken. Which come from Shem. The two different nations, Cyrus was Persian, and the Persians, also known as the Achaemenid Empire, Iranians today. Yeah. Salaki then. The Persians are the Iranians today. And Assyria was something else. I think they might have been of the same nation though, just a different tribe. I'm not sure about. Because I think the Persians ended up calling themselves Assyrian or Syria, and then they changed the name to Iranians. I'll have to look that up again, but yeah, just moving down again. It says timeline and Daniel chapters, dates. So I'm gonna speak a bit on the chapters and on some of the dates of how Daniel, just more context into the book of Daniel. Then I think after this we'll get into the actual break going back to the breakdown. This is just more context on just certain timelines of certain chapters and what dates certain chapters come before other chapters, because the book of Daniel isn't exactly in order. So just to get some edification on this, it says going into the timeline of certain chapters of Daniel, basically it's not in order. It says because the book of Daniel is not completely chronological in order, chapters 5 and 6 comes after chapter 7. But it's not in that order. So it technically should be chapter 7, then chapter 5, then chapter 6. Chapter 7 comes after those chapters because chapter 5 is the downfall of Babylon, then chapter 7 is going into the first year of Belshazzar. Yep, and Belshazzar, once again, as we read, we talked more about in the last video, he was he really wasn't related at all to, by bloodline at least, to Nebuchadnezzar, but maybe through a marriage by his father. Possibly his father was possibly married to one of the daughters of Nebuchadnezzar. Or she could have just been allowed to rule as princess. Hence why she's mentioned in that chapter. There's a certain queen that's mentioned in that chapter. I don't think they say her name. It just says some queen came and talked to Belshazzar about his dream, and who to find for his dream, to find about, well, not his dream, but about the writing, Yeah, the writing that he saw, basically the spiritual apparition he saw, basically. So either she could have just been a queen that they respected and allowed to continue ruling, or she could have been actually married to Belshazzar's father, who was Nabonidus. Hence, that's how she would have known about Daniel. But yeah, going back to this, it says, so chapter 5 is the downfall of Babylon, which is way after chapter 7. Chapter 7 is going into the first year of Belshazzar. And depending on how many years Belshazzar ruled, or how old he was when he started ruling, that could have been years before chapter 5 as well. Meaning Babylon is still in power. It's like rewinding a movie 30 minutes back and then jumping back to the beginning of it, then skipping to the last 5 minutes. Yeah, so that's kind of like how this chapter is, kind of how they organize this book of Daniel. That's kind of how it's timeline wise. It's how it's kind of organized. So it's not gonna make much sense if you're just reading it and not trying to get any background behind it, doing the work behind that to understand it. Yeah, it's gonna be confusing. This is from my quick research. This is just my guess. It would make more sense if it was Daniel 7, then Daniel 8, then Daniel 5, then Daniel 9, then chapter 11, then 12, then Daniel 6, and lastly Daniel chapter 10. So that's just my guess. Just when you go based off of the dates that they give you, which usually is mentioned in some king in the year of his reign. Oh, you can look more into that yourself if it's in your spirit too. I'm just getting some scratching of the surface here. But basically, just to make the point, basically, the book of Daniel is not necessarily in chronological form, which makes it hard to understand if you just read from chapter 1 to 12. And that's how basically the book of Revelations is like that as well. Some of it jumps forward, some of it jumps back. Like chapter 20, for example, in Revelation, it talks about well, actually, that's not chapter 20, but more like chapter... I don't know. I can't think of an example right now, but there's certain verses in one chapter they might have certain verses that goes into the destruction, and then the next chapter goes back into the beast, as if like the beast was revived again, but it's not. So you can get an idea. Saying all that to make this point. This is speaking on Daniel. Just get some more clarification on this chapter's the timeline of the fall of Babylon and when it actually happened, because this is going into Darius. He's mentioned in verse 1. And next we'll speak on Cyrus the Great. Because in Daniel 5, for example, it doesn't mention Cyrus the Great. And then in Daniel 11, if I'm not mistaken, that doesn't really mention Cyrus the Great either. It jumps to his son ruling. But he basically is important because and it's important to speak on him because they align with these first events, these first two verses in Daniel 11. Daniel 2 reads the day of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Daniel 2:1. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherever his spirit was troubled and his sleep brake from him. The second year of Nebuchadnezzar, the date of this would have been 603 BC because Nebuchadnezzar ruled from September 605 BC to his death in August 562 BC. He ruled for 43 years. At this time, Daniel had this prophecy at 603 BC, and Daniel 5 is years ahead, about 64 years after chapter 2, 538 BC. Daniel 5 was around 538 BC. Daniel 2 was around 562. Salakia, 603 BC. Yeah, so Nebuchadnezzar would have been already been dead once Babylon gets taken down. He would have been already been. It would have already been 30 something years. Just my rough guess. Close to 30 years, maybe 25 to 30 years, about 25 to 30 years dead already once Babylon got destroyed. It says that's why it doesn't mention Nebuchadnezzar. This means from chapter 2 to chapter 5, and Daniel is about a 64-year gap ahead. The kingdom this time would have been Nabonidus, because once you get to chapter 5, which is about Darius coming in Babylon, it's 64 years after Daniel 2. Once again, the prophecy of that tall statue with metals, etc., when Nebuchadnezzar was still in power, that's why when you just read it non-chronologically, and you get to chapter 5, you're like Belshazzar in chapter 5. You'll think it's Nebuchadnezzar's son. Yeah, we mentioned that yesterday a bit already. Then if you just go from chapter 5 to chapter 7, you read about Belshazzar again. So it's kind of like you think Belshazzar is back in power or something, but that's not the case. It says the first year of Belshazzar in chapter 7. So now let's talk about a bit on Cyrus the Great, because I believe the next verse doesn't even mention Cyrus the Great. It's gonna skip to his son and then like 3 other kings. So now you know who Darius is. And some context on chapter 5. They say Cyrus the Great ruled from 559 BC to 530 BC. Cyrus ruled as a vast kingdom when you look up the Achaemenid Empire from the Hellespont and Mediterranean Sea up to the Indus River, and allowed people's customs and religion of lands. And Cyrus was anointed by the Most High to bring back Israel, as prophecy says in Isaiah 45:1. And also in Jeremiah 25 here, verse 10, I will banish from them the sounds of joy and gladness, the voices of the bride and bridegroom, the sound of millstones, and the lights of the lamp. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation and the land of the Babylonians for their guilt, declares the Lord, and will make it desolate forever. I will bring on that land all the things I have spoken against it, all that are written in this book and prophesied by Jeremiah against all the nations. They themselves will be enslaved by many nations and great kings. I will repay them according to their deeds and the work of their hands. Also, another precept here, Ezra 1:1, mentions Cyrus. Cyrus helps the exiles to return. This is the subhead in there. Verse 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm, and also to put it in writing. Verse 2, this is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem and in Judah. Yeah, and this is, that's the point there, and another artifact is called the Cyrus cylinder, which goes into what it said in the scriptures here. Linking to the 70 years prophecy. And the Cyrus cylinder is, by the way, is disputed by scholars because it only identifies Mesopotamian sanctuaries, general policy allowing deportees to return and reestablish cult sites. It makes no mention of Jews, Judea, or Jerusalem. But obviously, I think that's just my opinion. I think that's Esau aligned on that because just based off the fact of how Esau's paid so-called scholars and liars and call themselves scholars to say and come out with false information to disprove and discredit the scriptures. When you go into the history, he has something called the Bible Destruction Group, which that's why you got something called the Apocrypha, which means the hidden book. And then you got other translations like the NIV and NLT and other these translations that go off with certain words. You change one word in one verse, and then the whole context is going to get destroyed just off changing that one word. Like in prime example in Revelation 13, where it says, "He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword." The NLT or NIV, it's going to say, "He who is to be killed with the sword, he's to be," roughly paraphrasing, I forgot the rest. But when you get into the KJV, once again, it says, "He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. He that brought into captivity, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity." And it sounds way different from saying, "He that is to be killed with the sword must be killed with the sword. He that is to be led to captivity shall be led to captivity." That can sound way different, especially when you change the context of that doctrine as well. And that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, just based off that record of Esau, yeah, man, more than likely, they probably took off the specific spot that's talked about Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed it. And use that to validate how basically it was that it mentioned Judah, so that never happened. Because once again, it also because another interesting fact is that the Cyrus cylinder is missing a good portion of it as well. So that's just me speculating. And I can't falsely accuse. I could be wrong, but no one is double. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm on point. And even if that portion didn't mention Judah or Jerusalem, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna, that's not gonna be enough to deny my faith and deny what scriptures say. I mean, because you got plenty of, if we're going to go off artifact for artifact, that's plenty of more artifacts I can pull up that's going to prove to me myself that the scriptures is real, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have plenty of artifacts that goes into scriptures that's been written for, that date back to, that can date back to 70 AD, or even up further back to than 70 AD, like the catacomb, the Isaiah cave scrolls, the caves at Mamre, something like that. It's called that, which those date back earlier than 70 AD, I think, way back from time wise from 70 AD, from 70 AD. So take it or leave it, as they say, right? Take it or leave it. It says the Cyrus cylinder is incomplete with approximately one-third of its original structure and text missing. While it was found in fragments in 1879, subsequent archaeological discoveries have helped fill in some of the lost content. We do not have the complete original text of the Cyrus cylinder. Approximately one-third of the physical artifact is missing. However, archaeologists have reconstructed much of the missing portions using other surviving fragments and ancient copies of the same proclamation. A significant, they could be lying on that, who knows? It says a significant portion of the original cylinder is physically lost, but similar cuneiform tablets found in 2010 confirmed that the text was a widely distributed proclamation, helping scholars fill in certain gaps. And I believe they have something called the Silver Scrolls, which is a very small mini piece of metal, I think silver, I think it was jewelry, that has the number 6, I think it's 24 to 26, the anointing prayer on it. And that dates back to, I want to say, about 400 BC or something like that. So they're showing you, man, how, yeah, the scriptures can't be faked. Just showing you that our tradition, because we are the Hebrew Israelites indeed, can't be fake, and it can't be something that's mythological, because what nation, what civilization is just going to be writing these verses from this book down just to rewriting them down, unless they had some deeper meaning behind it, and it had something that was real behind to it. Unlike a fiction or a book like Harry Potter, nobody's gonna die and go to war because of some fictional ass book like Harry Potter, and be writing those verses in that book down on jewelry or scrolls, because that shit would be folly, man. That shit doesn't make sense. But I can see him writing these verses down in this book that's giving instructions and the ways to life to live by and to go to war for. And so you had the Maccabees, they went to war because of this. So yeah, man, I don't see that being fairy tales or fake. It's just common sense, bro. I mean, you got dumb people out here that's just atheist, they hate God, they hate the Most High, they want to be atheists. But that's foolishness. The scripture say the fool says in his heart there is no God. Even kids know that there is a God. Like even when I was a kid, I knew that there was a God. When I would go outside and look at the trees and hear the birds and see the skies, I just knew just looking at that there was a creator. But because man is proudful and because man has his own inventions, they walk in darkness. They continue in darkness until the Lord has to humble them to make them see. Because the Lord can humble anyone down to wake up and admit that there is a true God. But anyway, I'm off topic. Continuing on, it says, here's the scripture, 2 Chronicles 36:22-23. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all the kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdom of the earth have the Lord God of heaven given to me, and he hath charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? The Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. Okay, now let's going back to Daniel 11, verse 2. Basically going into the 3 kings and the 4th king. Basically going into the 4th kings. Here's some context. This is jumping about 9 years after Babylon fell. And verse 1. The first verse, it mentions the son of... yeah. Yeah, this is jumping 9 years after verse 1. Because it starts with Cambyses the second. And the verse is a time span from 530 BC, the death of Cyrus. In the beginning of his son's rulership, Cambyses II, until the 4th king Xerxes and his death on August 465 BC. It reads, Now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So Cyrus isn't included because this is in the future, hence why it reads, Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings. And also, it will fit more in the timeline of the 4th king if you go off Cambyses first rather than Cyrus. So it says, in the first king was Cyrus the Great, eldest son. Cambyses the second. The second was Bardia, the younger son of Cyrus the Great, the younger brother of Cambyses the second. The third is Darius the Great, or also called Darius the first. So yeah, Cambyses the second. His crowning achievement was the historic conquest of Egypt in 525 BCE. After successfully conquering Egypt in 525 BCE, Persian king Cambyses II brought neighboring coastal regions of eastern Libya, historically known as Cyrenaica, under Persian control. Yeah, he ruled from 530 to 522 BCE. Here's Ezra 4, verse 5 to 6. Verse 6 is confusing because it says Ahasuerus, then verse 7 says Artaxerxes. Verse 6, it's basically it's still talking about Cambyses II, and verse 7's the same person. Ahasuerus, sometimes changed to Artaxerxes, just like Darius is the title, like Pharaoh or Caesar. Yeah, just like Pharaoh was a title, and Caesar was a title for the Romans, Pharaoh for the Egyptians. Ahasuerus was a title for the Medo and Persians rulers. And Ahasuerus, Artaxerxes would have been his real name was obviously Cambyses. So yeah, Ahasuerus was just how the Persians pronounced it. Artaxerxes would have been how the Greeks pronounced it. Here's the verse. Ezra 4 and 5, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purposes all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Yeah, because, and it would just make sense because the temple was finished during the reign, I think it was the 6th year of Darius. The point, I know it was, I know for a fact it was sometime during the reign of Darius, though. And Darius would have had, after Darius would have came Xerxes, and then after Xerxes would have came his son Artaxerxes. So that wouldn't make sense for verse 6 for you to say that's any other king after Darius. And especially to say that would be any other king after who that's actually talking about, which is Cambyses II. Sometimes referred to as his title name. Another nickname was Ahasuerus or Artaxerxes as well. And just for context, because it even tells you here, so I typed in, is Artaxerxes another translation for Ahasuerus, just to double check, and I know I spelled it a bit wrong, but they know what I'm saying though. It says, yes, it says in some historical and biblical translation, Artaxerxes is used as an alternate name for Ahasuerus. So I guess Ahasuerus was the Hebrew way of saying it, and Artaxerxes, they're saying, is the Persian name of saying it. And of course, AI goes off too. They're going off here with saying Xerxes is the direct and widely accepted historical translation for this name, which that's actually. So yeah, I guess Xerxes would have been another way of saying it. That's possible. We don't know for sure, and I don't think they even know for sure either. But yeah, later on later on you get another king that's named Artaxerxes. I think he was specifically, or he was named Artaxerxes the second. Not to get that all confused, but yeah. And to be honest, Xerxes could have just been a shorter way of saying it. It might have not been the more accurate way of saying it. It just could have been a shorter way of saying it. But that just happened to be Xerxes' name, and then his son just happened to have named himself Artaxerxes, which would have been just coincidence, because Ahasuerus would have been the Hebrew way of saying Artaxerxes, which is a longer version of saying Xerxes. That's my guess. But don't get those names. Don't get those people confused with each other. Yeah, the temple would have been finished way before Artaxerxes came to the scene, and it definitely would have already been finished before Xerxes even came to power. And I think that's what the brother got confused last time when we were breaking this down as well. So he went off on that one, but just continuing on with this one, it says, so yeah, Ahasuerus sometimes changed to Artaxerxes. Yeah, Ahasuerus was the way the Hebrews say it. Once again, Artaxerxes would have been just, I guess it would have just been the Greek way of saying it. And then the name Xerxes would have just been the shorter way of saying it. That's just my guess. But yeah, don't get them confused. Xerxes and Artaxerxes and Cambyses was 3 different people, but yeah, it just happened that Artaxerxes, the name, and Ahasuerus, the name, were titles, and I'm also even gonna go as far as saying Xerxes would have just been a title, like Pharaoh or Caesar. It just happened that those titles would actually end up becoming the actual names of those kings. So hopefully you're not confused and following along. Trying to explain it the best I can, but this is Ezra 4 and continuing on in 7. And in the days of Artaxerxes, this is still talking about Cambyses the second, wrote Bishlam, Mithridates, Tabdiel, and the rest of their companions unto Artaxerxes, king of Persia, because the temple would have already been finished before Artaxerxes came, which was the son of Xerxes, and before Xerxes even came to power. It's just the walls still had to be finished when you go into the time of Artaxerxes, the son of Xerxes. But yeah, the temple would have been done, would have been finished. And this is talking about with the temple, once again, the days when they were still having to finish the temple. Because if you were to put the timeline of the temple being finished as well, around the time of Xerxes or Artaxerxes, that would have been breaking the prophecy of the 70 years of how the temple would be finished in the 70 years. Before 70 years. As well, so. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure there was a prophecy of how many years it would take till the temple gets finished and restored, already brought back, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, continuing on, it says, "And the writings of the letter was written in the Syrian tongue and interpreted in the Syrian tongue. Rehum, the chancellor, and Shemshai, the scribe, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes the king in this sort." God. Yes, they're saying it right here as well that just for edification, it also says it right here. Artaxerxes was a throne name. It says yes, it was used as a royal throne name and title, much like Caesar in the Roman Empire or Pharaoh in Egypt. When certain Persian kings, specifically of the Achaemenid Empire, ascended the throne, they would drop their given birth names and take on dynastic titles. At least 3 to 5 historical kings ruled under the name Artaxerxes, because the name means kingdom, The word is broken down into two parts: arda meaning truth, justice or order. The part of Xerxes meaning kingdom or dominion. Combined translates to truth, kingdom, truth, dominion, justice, kingdom, justice, dominion, or ordered kingdom, ordered dominion, or he who reigns true through truth, or having a kingdom of justice. God. So let's move on to the second king that mentioned the Bardia here in Daniel 2. The second kings, it says, before we get into Darius, which is not the same Darius once again. Let's go into Bardia here. It says, his true identity and subsequent reign are heavily debated in history. This is why it says here, many modern historians question Darius' version of events, suggesting that it was a fabricated tale meant to justify Darius' own seizure or fortune. Yeah, because Darius has a lot to do with taking out Bardia, which Darius the Great, also called Darius the First, was comes as the third king in the Daniel 11 verse 2. Which I'm gonna read the verse again just to not get you confused. It says, and now I will show you the truth. Behold, there shall you stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. So the first is Cambyses, Bardia, then Darius. And the fourth shall be far richer than they all. That's Xerxes. And by his strength to his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Because when you go into the movie 300, basically that's what that's all about. Is Xerxes. They even They even have him showing up in all this gold and being carried up on some type of platform with his throne. So yeah, and that was the king that also was mentioned in the book of Esther as well. With all, because it also mentions in the book of Esther how he had all these types of food feasts. He had like all kinds of there's this it mentions, I think it's in the book in the Apocrypha, and in the rest of Esther it tells you how he had like hundreds kinds of foods of each kinds of foods or something like that, which would have been very very expensive to do. Just showing you the power and the lavish lifestyle that king had, Xerxes. Hence why it says he shall be far richer than them all. Yeah. So it says, this is why they say this could have happened. A murder could have happened before Cambyses II left for Egypt. He secretly assassinated his brother Bardia out of jealousy. Yeah, so Bardia could have actually been related to Cambyses, and others say that he might have just been a false person trying to come up to get into power, to say that. So we don't know for sure, but yeah, the point is Bardia was like the third, one of the, no, not the third, but like the second of these kings here mentioned in Daniel 11 and 2. A usurpation, a religious leader named, how do you say that, Agayu Mata, impersonated Bardia and claimed the Persian throne for a few months in 522 BCE. Darius' account. Darius the Great eventually overthrew the impostor, according to Darius' official Istan inscription. Bugwa Amatu pretended to be the actual son of Cyrus the Great to legitimize his rule. So that could be that story could be real, it could be false, or he could have actually assassinated his brother while Cambyses was left. The point is, some way, somehow, Bardia was up there. He got up there somehow. Maybe he ruled for like a day, 2 days. I don't know, but yeah. I really didn't look too much into Bardia. I mean, you could if you it's in your spirit too, but yeah, he was probably. My guess is he was probably a joint ruler with his father, or maybe he was actually maybe he was actually not even related to Cyrus. Uh, I mean, Cambyses. Maybe he wasn't related to Cambyses, and was a usurper, an imposter. So either way it goes, he was up there somehow, but he got taken out soon. And then Darius the Great comes next, who ruled from September 29th, 522 BC to October 486 BCE. He ruled the empire at its territorial peak when it included much of West Asia, parts of the Balkans, Thrace, Macedonia, and Paeonia, and the Caucasus most of the Black Sea coastal regions, Central Asia, and Indus Valley as far in the Far East, and portions of North Africa and Northeast Africa, including Egypt, eastern Libya, and coastal Sudan. So Darius the First, or Darius the Great, played a pivotal role in the construction of the temple by officially authorizing and financing its completion following a 15-year halt to of construction due to local opposition. The Jews petitioned the king, prompting Darius to search royal archives and reaffirm the original decree of Cyrus the Great. Tatani's challenge. Tatanai, the Persian governor of the region, demanded to know who authorized the construction and wrote a letter to King Darius to stir up trouble. The search of the archives. Darius ordered a search of the royal records. A scroll containing Cyrus' original decree was found in the citadel of Ecbatana. Darius' decree. Not only did Darius confirm Cyrus' authorization, but he also decreed that Tanai should not interfere and ordered that the construction be fully funded using the royal treasury. Darius is mentioned in the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, Zechariah, and Haggai. Ezra 5. They sent a letter unto him where it was written thus: Unto Darius the king, all in peace. The second temple was completed in the 6th year of King Darius the first reign. Ezra did not arrive in Jerusalem until the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Yep, that would have been the son of Xerxes. Temple completed in 515 BCE. With the royal decree and protection, the temple was finished in the 6th year of Darius's reign. Khan. Yup, and he ruled from 522 to 486. Yeah, so Ezra wouldn't have been there until like uh 70, almost 70, like 50 years after the temple was finished. So once again, just going into how that was finished during Darius's reign. Ezra 4 and 24, this then ceased the work of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. So it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Haggai 1 and 1. In the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, and the first day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jozadak, the high priest, saying, another precept, Ezra 6 and 12, and the God that hath caused his name to dwell there, destroy all kings and people, and shall put to their hand, that shall put to their hand to alter and to destroy the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree, let it be done with speed. The temple was dedicated shortly after completion, in time for the Passover festival in the spring. First Ezra 3 and 1. Now when Darius reigned, he made a great feast unto all his subjects, and unto all his household, and unto all the princes of Media and Persia, and to all the governors and captains and lieutenants that were under him, from India unto Ethiopia, of all 127 provinces. And when they had eaten and drunken, and being satisfied, were gone home, then Darius the king went into his bedchamber and slept, and soon after awakened. And then three young men that were of the guard that kept the king's body spake one to another, let every one of us speak a sentence, he that shall overcome, and whose sentence shall seem wiser than the others, unto him shall the king Darius give great gifts and great things, and token of victory. Jumping down to 22, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the prophet of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, and he made a proclamation throughout all the kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord, the God of heaven, given me, and he hath charged me to build him an house in Jerusalem. Jumping down to verse 1 Ezra 4:44, going into those wise sentences that these the bodyguards were trying to give to Darius to see what prize they would win. And Zerubbabel won. So first Ezra 4:44, and to send away all the vessels that were taken away out of Jerusalem when Cyrus set apart, when he vowed to destroy Babylon, and to send them again thither. Thou also hast vowed to build up the temple which the Edomites burned, which when Judea was made desolate by the Chaldees. And now, O Lord the King, this is that which I require, and which I desire of thee, and this is the princely liberality proceeding from thyself. I desire therefore that thou make it good the vow, the performance of it with thy own mouth, that is vowed to the King of heaven. Then Darius the king stood up and kissed him, and wrote letters for him unto all the treasurers and lieutenants and captains and governors, and they should safely convey on their way both him and all those that go up with him to build Jerusalem. God. Now, the fourth king is Xerxes the First. Son of Darius the Great and Atosa, a daughter of Cyrus the Great. He ruled from 486 to 465. Yeah, so you were about 21 years or 20 years. In Western history, Xerxes is best known for his invasion of Greece in 480 BC, which ended in Persian defeat in 480 BC. Though he famously defeated King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae and subsequently burned Athens, his fleet was ultimately defeated at the Battle of Salamis. His attempt to conquer Greece was meant to avenge his father's early defeat at Marathon. Esther 1 verse 1 that says, subheading says, Queen Vashti disposed. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. Xerxes ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At the time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media. The princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. Just going into the wealth he had. Oh yeah, he should be far richer than them all. Verse 5, and when those days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. 8. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. King Xerxes, first of Persia, was assassinated by Artabanus, who was the commander of his royal bodyguard and one of the most powerful officials in the Persian court. Artabanus and his co-conspirators murdered the king in his sleep in August 465 BCE. According to Herodotus, Xerxes' fondness for women and lack of restraint led to his pursuit of his brother's this wife. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. Xerxes was ultimately wicked. He was a heathen, so that could be possible. Even though he did do some good in the book of Esther, he still bowed to those idols and those other gods. So it's possible that he committed adultery, and hence why he got destroyed, like how he got destroyed there with his bodyguard assassinating him, which would be an interesting if that's true, because he is mentioned in the book of Esther as doing helping spare my people's lives. So that would be interesting there if that happened. But I think with that, I might just stop here. Once again, there's a lot of history and a lot to go into in this book. So we're gonna go into Daniel 11. I might as well just get for this verse straight here. It says that now it's going into Alexander. obviously. It says, "And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will." Now, this is going into Alexander the Great, who ruled from 336 to 323. So, from the beginning of verse 2 to the beginning of verse 3, let me pull up this timeline. Beginning of verse 2 to the beginning of verse 3, that's like a 94-year gap. And then from verse 1 to verse 2, from the downfall of Babylon to the, or from the, from the downfall of Babylon to the beginning of Cambyses' the second reign, that would have been a 9-year gap. And then verse 2 is like going in 94 years in combining these kings on their years of reigning till you get Alexander. So, because you had another Darius after Darius the first. Could have been the same person in reincarnation that ends up getting defeated by Alexander. Yeah, so Alexander, once again, Alexander ruled from 336 to 323 BC. He took down Darius the third. So I said Darius the second. As actually Darius the third. He's mentioned in the scriptures in First Maccabees 1:1, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Shittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in instead, the first over Greece. And also Alexander is mentioned in chapters in Daniel. Chapter 7, verse 6. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast. Fuck. Yeah, was another beast, the one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. Because obviously, as we know already, the leopard is how fast Alexander took down the empire, the kingdoms around him, and he went to war with, and how fast he conquered the vast territory, and also 4 wings going into his 4 generals. It says this beast had 4 heads, and it had 4 heads. Once again, same thing, and it was given authority to rule. It's chapter 8, verse 3. I looked, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns, standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. The ram represents the Medes and Persians, and one of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. One of the horns that grew bigger was the Persians. And I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased, and it became great. As no animal could stand against it, did as it pleased and became great. Verse 5, and I was thinking about this. Suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. 6. It came toward the two-horned ram I had seen standing beside a canal, and it charged at it in great rage. I saw it attack the ram, furiously striking the ram and shattering its two horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great. Why is this thing charged, bro? The goat became great. At the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place four prominent horns grew up toward the four winds of heaven. See, that is Daniel 9:3 again. And a mighty king shall stand up, and that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. So this was the great dominion on this map here. That was a major empire. That shall rule great dominion. Look up the Greek Empire map under Alexander the Great. The vast territory he ruled, it was larger than what the Persian Empire had at its peak. Yeah, because Alexander took what the Media Persians had, plus with the land he already was in, which was Greece. So if this is the scripture, like Daniel in First Maccabees, is a historical account of what Alexander did. Yeah, we got that already. He was first over Greece. Which were Edomites. And he was one of history's most successful in battle. One of history's most successful commanders during his youth. He was tutored by Aristotle until the age of 16. He would have known Paleo Hebrew and read in the scrolls how he would defeat Darius III. Josephus primarily mentions Alexander the Great in Book 11 of his work Antiquities of the Jews, specifically chapters 7 and 8, sections 302 to 347. Siege of Tyre and requests for aid. Alexander besieges Tyre and sends a letter to the Jewish high priest demanding troops and provisions. The high priest refuses, citing his oath of loyalty to Darius of Persia. The march on Jerusalem. After taking Gaza, Alexander marches toward Jerusalem. The high priest named Jaddua prays and receives a divine vision in a dream to welcome the Macedonian king. The encounter. Alexander meets the high priest, and the priest dressed in white and purple. To the surprise of his generals, Alexander bows before the high priest, explaining he had a vision of him and Macedonia, assuring him of his victory over Persia. The temple in the book of Daniel. Alexander is taken into the temple where he sacrifices to God. The Jewish high priest reportedly shows him the prophecies from the book of Daniel, predicting that a Greek king would conquer the Persian Empire, which Alexander takes as a reference to himself. Alexander broke Persian power in a series of decisive victories, including battles of Issus and Gaugamela. Alexander endeavored to reach the ends of the world and the great outer sea, and invading India, winning an important victory at the Battle of Hydaspes. His homesick troops demanded to go back. It took him 12 years to expand the Greek kingdom. That's why he's a leopard in Daniel 7. It says in Daniel 11, verse 3 again, and do according to his will, operating primarily as a single centralized empire rather than expanding slowly over centuries. built his empire in just 13 years, whereas the Roman Empire took several centuries of steady conquest. Alexander took as much as he wanted, his will, his plans, and also Alexander did something that was different for the first time. Certain laws, etc. Example. When he conquered Media or Persia, he insisted on making them slaves. He instead of making them slaves, he wanted to incorporate their culture and be integrated with them and have them learning. Yeah. His soldiers didn't like this. They didn't want to share with these peoples they conquered, and Alexander would force his soldiers to marry with those other women. Something not so heard of in this time, yeah, because before Alexander, that would have been very new and considered a big no. That would have been something that wouldn't have been acceptable with Alexander's father and other generals of that time to integrate with these other nations and accept them as Greeks and spread their Greek hierarchy with them. Hence why it says, he shall do according to his will. For the most part, yes, as the supreme king of Macedonia and conqueror of the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great held near absolute power. However, his absolute freedom had strict limits, and his ultimate undoing was bumping into the boundaries of his own man's endurance. Because Alexander was a heathen, he was spread out Hellenism and yeah. Yeah, that was also going into him spreading Hellenism.
We're here in Hollywood at the LA Film School campus. Let me show you our pro spaces where our students work.
Probably sometime in April 329. Alexander's growing Persianization was starting to become a... Alexander next subjugated the Mardians, defeating an army of 8,000 of them in the process. The Mardians were renowned horsemen, and Alexander took many of their horses as tribute to replace the thousands that had so far been lost. Though the campaign was progressing well, Alexander's growing Persianization was starting to become a problem. He had taken to wearing elements of Persian dress, including the Persian royal diadem, accepted Asians into his court, gave Persian cloaks to his companions to wear, indulged more and more in Persian luxury, and even ordered that 30,000 Persian boys be taught Greek and the Macedonian style of fighting. For the ancient authors, this Persianization was a source of serious criticism against Alexander, and even during Alexander's lifetime, it was divisive. Some of his officers, namely his childhood friends like Hephaestion and Ptolemy, were welcoming of blending Persian and Hellenic cultures, but the older officers in Alexander's army who had served under Philip, such as Parmenion, his son Philotas, and Cleitus the Black, were more critical. It would prove to be a dangerous divide.
So right there, just going into how different he was, because also he was young and he had a whole new way about how he was gonna call the shots and make the order of things, because you saw how he was basically wanting them to learn the Greek ways, and how basically that was that looked weird to the older generations, commanders that were there around him when his father was in power. And so he was going doing very radical new ideas, opening new ideas to around this time to his fellow countrymen. So hence that he shall do according to his will. So with that as the point, Shalom. Hopefully this was edifying and exhorting to the elect. We left off in verse 3. Next video will go, probably by next week, we'll go into verse 4. Once again, it's a lot of history to cover. A bar to ball.